right, so on healthcare, I will let you a couple of things.
All right, well, I would argue that the government has been the biggest contributing factor to the rise in healthcare prices and the, well, I don't want to say decline in quality, but decline in access to it. The government has added regulation after regulation in the last century or so that it's made it more difficult for new businesses to get into the healthcare industry. As consolidated power of the healthcare industry in the hands of a few organizations that basically created monopoly prices, and over the years just added more and more regulations, lobbied to add more regulations that just stack up the barrier to entry, stack up the costs, which helps make the rich richer, but for everyone else is just raised prices and made it a lot more difficult to get health.
Well, that actually connects to another issue as well, and that is campaign finance. So since there are a lot of politicians these days that are bought and paid for by big pharma, it makes sense that there would be these monopolies in terms of healthcare. And I would take a page out of Theodore Roosevelt's playbook and do a whole bunch of trust busting. But I would take the opposite approach. So you would argue that under the free market, of course, it would drive down costs, expand access, and everything would be fine and dandy. But I think free market principles, they only hinder the access for the vast majority of the American people. And also, I'm not saying the government should, just control every single aspect, have, completely socialized medicine, completely drive out private insurance. I actually would look at Germany's system, for instance. It has a healthy balance between private insurance and public insurance. So if you make under X amount, I'm not entirely sure what the amount is, but so under X amount of a salary, you are mandated to have public insurance. If you are over a set amount, then you have the option of also enrolling in private. So I personally am in favor of the public option and not a straight up single payer system. It does work in a lot of countries, but for a country as large as ours, with as many ideals as ours, you have free market people on one end, and you have social democrats on the other, in order to please both. I think it is wise to look at Germany's system and model ours after theirs. So the American Medical Association, the American College of Physicians, the American Academy of Family Physicians, they all support a public option. And they also want to lower the eligibility age for Medicare. Now, what age, they do disagree, but they do want to expand the access to Medicare. And I think it's possible to preserve our free market values as Americans and at the same time provide quality, affordable health care for all of our people. And also, people say, oh, how do you pay for it? How do you get this done? How do you push this through a stagnated Congress? Well, believe it or not, the president can actually do this with an executive order. Section 1881A of the Social Security Act basically says that so if there is some kind of environmental exposure, some kind of major catastrophe where people cannot in any way, shape, or form be held responsible for it, the president can just sign an executive order and make all of those people qualify for Medicare. And as a matter of fact, this was done under the Affordable Care Act. The people of a town called Libby, Montana, they were affected by an asbestos mine. And President Obama basically said, all right, so all the residents of this town are now enrolled in Medicare. So the president can do this like that. So it's not a matter of how do we push this through Congress, or how do we lobby this congressman or that senator. The president can do it in a heartbeat. So why not do it?
Well, problem with adding more government to the problem is that, well, for one, it's not replacing everything else. It's adding on, and well, the free market is based on competition. Competition drives prices down and drives quality up. And when the government is a competitor in that system, which I assume the rest of it would be free market with the public option.
essentially.
They would be a competitor with essentially unlimited funds and unlimited power. And what corporations will do, pharmaceutical companies and the hospitals, insurance companies, the regional insurance groups, what they will do is they'll take advantage of the public option, take advantage of the government, and they'll raise their prices to whatever they want, which the government will pay. As we've seen with the military, they'll pay thousands of dollars for individual nuts and bolts because their bureaucracy really pays attention. But free market would also improve the quality, and it would improve the ability for new companies to get into that. Right now, it costs about $1 billion for a pharmaceutical company to manufacture and to research and get approved any new drug, which cuts out any entrepreneur that wants to break into the market. Anyone who wants to change the system just does not have the capital required to break into the market. And every regulation has a cost. It has a cost to businesses, which in turn is a cost to consumers, because with every cost, the company has to recoup their profits. And well, since you bring up Germany, the United States subsidizes the cost of healthcare for the rest of the world. The United States pharmaceutical companies do the majority of research and development in any new drug or medical technology, and they pay the cost of regulations, which the American consumer then has to pay premium prices for all those regulations. But any consumer anywhere else in the world has access to our drugs and our medical technology for much lower prices, for the price that it should be. The price was based on supply and demand. The problem is the government increases demand and lowers the supply, which raises the price.
Well, as a Medicare, it actually pays a much smaller unit prices than any insurance agency out there in the market, and also its bargaining power through the roof. And then I do believe that having a public option would, in the long term, drive costs down. And also, it's very true that we spend so much more on healthcare in this country per capita. In fact, in 2019, it was $11,000 according to the OECD, but our health outcomes are abysmal compared to every other major developed nation. There are hundreds of thousands of Americans every year that file for medical bankruptcy. And now people oftentimes are, inspired and heartwarmed by, GoFundMe campaigns of, the charity that people partake in for each other. But actually, I'm disgusted by it. There are over 250,000 campaigns every year, and they raise over $650 million a year. In the richest country in the history of the world, that just should not happen. And also, when you talk about bureaucracy, people like to point to the VA. On the surface, I understand where you're coming from. I understand where conservatives and libertarians are coming from. but it simply is not what it appears to be. The claims process at the VA is slow, not because of bureaucracy. It's slow because of Congress's strict eligibility requirements. They're basically saying, well, you either have to be poor or you have to have some severe disability directly correlated to your time in war, your time in service. And a 2015 RAND Corporation study, it actually showed that wait times at the VA for new patients is actually slower than in the private sector, believe it or not. So that talking point, I do believe is moot. And when we look at Canada and the supposed problem of wait times or rationing or the flocking of Canadian citizens and doctors, simply not true. I mean, those are myths. And in my research, I have found absolutely nothing to back up those points. And as for a subsidizing of the healthcare in other countries, I do believe we should look out for our people first. I do. And in order to do that, we must guarantee healthcare as a right to all 27 million Americans who are currently uninsured.
The problem with guaranteeing healthcare as a right is that you don't have the right to somebody else's thing. In a voluntary system, it is voluntary transactions only. Otherwise it's force. It's tyranny. I think criticizing our system is, our system can absolutely be criticized, but to criticize it as an example of a free market system, I don't think is correct, because it is in no way a free market system. It is like the American Medical Association since 1910 has had the ability to regulate medical licensing and has the ability to oversee mergers of medical companies and insurance companies, and even can oversee the closure of them. The American Medical Association has incredible amounts of power, which it lobbied the government to do with Taft. Federal government also allows the patenting of drugs. Patenting of drugs lets you raise the price to whatever you want, because you are then the only company producing that drug. Which, of course, those patents don't really mean anything overseas, which is why we pay the price for that. Now, insurance companies make the whole system worse. Insurance companies let doctors' offices charge whatever they want. Insurance companies pay around 90% of medical costs, which was never the way it was supposed to be. It was supposed to be costs are low, and if they are high, the insurance company pays the rest. But now it's become a system that's dependent on insurance companies, which has just ruined the entire system, raised prices. Also, the group premiums and corporations. Our system is mostly based on employer-provided health insurance. Employer-provided health insurance, well, that expanded the insurance industry to be as prevalent as it is today. And that was, of course, under Truman. And you're a big fan of FDR. FDR exempted insurance companies from antitrust laws. Well, from a lot of federal regulations, but antitrust laws specifically has allowed them to become monopolistic. If they weren't monopolistic, they were not allowed to become monopolies, it would actually be a free market system. Prices would be low. And, well, no monopoly has ever been created without the help of the government. The government can provide 4 things which no other entity can provide. Give you land, can give you patents, give you money, and it can tariff other countries that are competing. only the government can provide these things. Without them, the companies have to compete on their own in an open market.
Well, so you talk about how you would like less regulation. I understand where you're coming from, because at the surface it would look like the excess of regulation has created this healthcare crisis in the first place. As a matter of fact, I would argue the opposite. That we simply do not have this rampant problem of healthcare bankruptcies in other developed nations. And why do you think that is?
Because we're not free market.
It need to be that.
No, but their prices are low because of us. We allow them to have low prices because we pay high prices.
Well, we too should pay a lower prices, because as I said, Medicare, it actually does pay a lower prices than other insurance companies, and its bargaining power is through the roof. And I do believe that, I hate to sound like an authoritarian here, but more regulation may very well be the answer to place a cap on said prices, and also to open up our borders and to allow different drugs, different medicines to come in. And for now, I know that I like to talk down on the free market, but in theory, it's fine and dandy, and it does have its time and place, absolutely. And that is why I am in favor of a public option, because I do believe it would help drive costs down. If we had full-on socialized medicine, if we had a full-on single-payer system, I do believe we would see a lot of the problems that you are concerned with.
Well, I think.
Oh, and also as for FDR, I do want to say I do think it's perfectly fine and dandy to disagree with one of your political heroes. So I will say that FDR should have actually taken a page out of his cousin's playbook, Theodore Roosevelt. And yes, he should have trust busted all of those companies. And that's what I would do if I were president. But FDR's legacy was, as a matter of fact, carried on by Lyndon Johnson, who established Medicare in the first place. And how do we carry on that torch? How do we continue that legacy? By making sure that Medicare is an option for everyone on the market. And since you consider yourself to be a libertarian, and since there are so many people in this country that are yearning for Medicare for all, which, to be fair, I'm not in favor of, but according to a Hill-Harris X poll from April of this year, 69% of Americans support Medicare for all. So if you consider yourself a libertarian and someone who's a champion of free choice, if people want that option, they should have that option. I'm not forcing the public option down anyone's throats. If you want it, it's yours. But if you also want to keep your employer provide insurance, by all means, go ahead and do it.
You say you're not forcing anyone to it, but you're forcing people to pay taxes, for which those taxes will go to this program that would be unnecessary, because it would be unnecessary if the system were free. But the problem with your system is it's created to force. If people are entitled to healthcare, then your doctors are forced to do their jobs rather than doing it based on their career and market principles. I think the point that I made earlier about Americans paying higher prices than the rest of the world, I think that's a very important factor in this discussion, because it's the reason that other other countries can treat healthcare. Right? We look at them, say, well, it works for them, but it works for them because we let it work for them. Because we pay those prices. We don't have to pay those prices. If regulations were lower, the cost of getting the drugs out onto the market would be lower. The cost of new companies getting into the market and creating better products for lower prices, that would happen more often. And prices would be lower for everyone. Not just around the world, but also here. You could actually even out prices around the world if you introduce competition. The problem is there is no competition. So there's very little competition. These companies conspire together to raise prices, to set their own prices. Now, you mentioned a price cap. Price cap would work until inflation passes that price cap, and then companies can't make any money. And you could raise the price cap, but there's no reason to have a price cap, because if these companies were actually competing, they would be lowering their prices. Instead, they've done nothing but raise their prices for decades, far above the rate of inflation, far above the rise in consumer price index. It's healthcare as well as education in the exact same regard. The costs have increased way more than they should under any reasonable economic policy.
Well, as for the price cap, I would actually tie that to inflation, as I would a lot of things, like the minimum wage, for instance, UBI, for instance. There are a number of proposals in mind that I would directly tie to inflation. As for competition, I think step number one, and we do both agree on this, trust bust. Break up these massive monopolies and have them break up into smaller subsidiaries, smaller independent companies, and compete with each other. Throw in the public option in there as well. I do believe that would drive costs down. And as for us subsidizing the rest of the world, you know what? Fair point. If we should subsidize them, they should also subsidize us.
Not sure how that would work. I know they subsidize us. But, I mean, they got pharmaceuticals as well.
The problem with these pharmaceutical companies is they are oftentimes multinational, and also they buy politicians left and right.
Mm-hmm.
So I do believe it's not an end-all be-all. It's not the absolute cure to this problem, but if we break up those monopolies, step number one, I do believe we will see a massive improvement in this problem. But of course, that's only the beginning. We should go so much farther. And
see, I don't think breaking up the companies is one step, but you have to allow newer competition, new companies to enter the marketplace. Even if you didn't break up the companies, you cut regulations, you cut tons of regulations, and the new companies can get in and start competing. And eventually they would outcompete current companies. Because current companies are not used to competition. They've been top of their game for quite a while. And all you need is a disruptor. And you can't have a disruptor until you deregulate the market.
I do think that disruptor we're talking about would, in this instance, be the public option. Because once these insurance companies, once they realize, oh crap, this is a popular program, the American people love this, they will realize, you know what, we should drop our prices too.
Problem is, pharmaceutical companies and any of the healthcare providers would only get richer because public option would guarantee the business, right? When the government is a guaranteed customer, you have guaranteed money, and then you can charge whatever you want to charge because the government pays. The government has the money; they have unlimited money to pay for whatever they want to pay for. So, in a sense, you'd be hurting any company that's operating in the free market, and maybe even have lower prices for consumers using the public option. Essentially, you would just monopolize the public option. So it would be the
And if that is the end result, that it does end up being a monopoly, then I do believe that that is a democratic way to go about eventually having single payer. I don't want to go, straight out the gate with single payer, but if, naturally the American people choose to have that system as a libertarian, as a proponent of free choice, if that is the natural flow of our society, then so be it. And I actually do believe that should be the end goal, but for now, that is not my proposal.
And the tyranny by the majority is not free choice. Maybe it's choice for some of the population, but for the rest of the population that is still paying for something that they don't support.
Well,
That's not free choice.
I tell you what, people don't have free choice now either.
Well,
and say we were to implement straight up, unhindered, unadulterated free market. Say that prices do go down. Okay. Say that access is expanded. Okay. But there would be millions and millions of uninsured or underinsured Americans, and I don't think that you getting a health coverage should depend on how much you make or on your personal socioeconomic circumstances. And what the public option would do is, if you make under X amount, you're automatically enrolled. Period. Well, unless you opt out. But
insurance companies is an archaic system. It's an old system that has proven to be a terrible one.
Oh, you know what? I agree, definitely. So let's cut out the middleman and have government step in. That would be the public option, and eventually, in the long run, if the American people so will it, then single payer, or heck, even socialized medicine, and then there is no middleman. It would just be straight up. Okay, you go to the doctor, and you get your treatment, boom, taken care of, no middleman, and you don't even have to worry about a payment, and you will never see a bill in your entire life.
Yeah, taken care of. What I'm arguing is that under a free market system, you don't need insurance companies either. The free market system would lower prices to the point that insurance companies are relevant. We agree that insurance companies are bad, but we don't agree as to what the solution after you do away with the insurance companies are. Now,
well, I do think it is sadistic as heck to have a profit motive around the health of the general populace.
The profit motive is what drives companies to do what they do.
Profit motive is what has gotten us in this mess in the first place.
Yeah, profit motive coupled with lobbying.
Well, I honestly think that they would lobby for the system that you're proposing.
Okay, well,
and they would love less regulation. They would love to go all rampant.
Yeah, they've already done that, though. And we're living in the product of that system.
It would only be worse.
No, not if you get rid of the regulations that made it worse in the first place.
Well, see, here's what I believe happened. All right, there was a free market system for a while, and government had its hands off of them. But people were still dying left and right from entirely avoidable disease, from entirely avoidable medical bankruptcy. And then here come these pharma companies, and they formed their little monopolies. And yes, with the aid of government, that didn't have the balls to bust those trusts. And then it just perpetuates the system that we have. It gets worse and worse, and the rich get richer before the poor. The gap only widens. But how do we guarantee that we didn't have that problem in the first place? And that is why I do have that moral position of having universal coverage, because I think it is morally unacceptable for a single man, woman, or child to not have access to health insurance. And even in a completely unfettered free market, you still would have people die. You still would have people go bankrupt. And we can stop it. We can stop it today.
Yeah. I mean, you could even argue that you could use the government and those few cases that result in bankruptcies from medical operations. But
I tell you what, if I were president today, I would definitely invoke Section 1881A of the Social Security Act, because we are in the middle of a global pandemic, for Pete's sake. And if that is not, quote, environmental exposure, I don't know what is. So President Biden, if he were smart about this, on day one in the Oval Office, he would invoke it.
Yeah, well.
And also, Medicare is one of the most popular programs in the history of the country. I don't think we should deny people the free choice of partaking in a program that they love so much. I mean, it is a staple of what it means to be American, in the same way that Social Security is, in the same way that baseball and apple pie are.
I don't know if I would say those things are really American, but I think doing away with those things, just doing away with those things would be awful. You have to do away with them and replace them with a better system. The better system is one where companies are motivated by profit to make a product or provide a service that satisfies as many customers as possible. Right? We currently live in a system where that does not incentivize getting people healthy. It incentivizes keeping people back. And that has to do with pharmaceutical companies. Just want to sell as many drugs as they can, which they've patented.
So question, do you oppose patents?
I oppose patents, long-term patents. Being able to renew your EpiPen patent by slightly changing the design in your spring is criminal. But patents in general, I don't.
All right, so you know what? I think that when we talk about less regulation versus more regulation, maybe it's not so much the amount of regulation we have, but are we regulating smart? Are we regulating in the right areas?
And are we getting rid of regulations when we're adding? Are we just adding new regulations, or are we getting rid of the ones that didn't work instead of just piling more regulations on top of each other?
Well, I'll tell you what. If I were president, well, in practice, maybe this won't work out every single time, but in theory, every time that I propose or introduce a new regulation, I would also take one away. Because I do agree. I do. Being able to renew a patent by just a new spring, come on, man. That is not a justification for a new patent.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, well, the government needs to take this problem a lot more seriously. They need to start looking at it as they are causing the problem. Because they are. Well, the government and the American Medical Association, which is the reason we're in this mess in the first place. They were the ones that wanted to increase restrictions on medical licensing and whatnot. They were the first to do it. They consolidated their power pretty quickly. about 100 years ago. And it's all been downhill from there. Free market is just shrunk. Every new regulation.
Well, I do definitely think that there is merit to the argument they're making. I do have a question for you, though. So back in 2019, we spent about $11,000 per capita on healthcare, and that is about double than the next country on this list, Switzerland. So how would that number fluctuate in your system? Would it go down dramatically?
It would, because prices would go down. Average prices would go down, and everyone would be paying significantly less. Most of those costs, a lot of those costs are just the insurance premiums they pay. Insurance companies pay the other 90% of that, right? So that those healthcare costs are quite a bit more than the insurance companies are paying for it. And all that money is going to healthcare providers, the insurance company. When you go to the doctor and they hand you the bill, that bill goes to the insurance company. That bill is arbitrarily high. They charge whatever price they want. Insurance company says, no, that's too high. It should be this. And they give you another artificially inflated price, which then the insurance company pays. Right? These healthcare providers can charge whatever they want because of the insurance system. You take all that away, and these healthcare providers all of a sudden can't charge prices that their customers can't pay. Otherwise, they're just not going to profit because the customers can't pay the bills. Right?
Well, to contrast how much we spend per capita on healthcare with a couple of other countries, so Germany in 2019 was 6,646. So that's a little over half of what we spend, and by far, the lowest on this list was Spain, 3,616. And what do these countries have in common? They have in common government stepping in and guaranteeing healthcare. As of right now, in the case of Germany, as I mentioned before, they do have it's technically not a single-payer system, it's called a multi-payer system, and that is also what I'm proposing, to have that healthy balance of public and private, because I do think that there is a time and place for both.
The problem with public option is it's never been as good. It's never been as quality as free markets. So if you look at Canada, the average wait time to get sonogram is 6 weeks. You can walk in today and get one there and be left. Because what the government does in the public system is it sets restrictions, arbitrary restrictions that maybe make sense when it was created, but as you actually implement things, the real world starts to show. Now, in a competing company, their whole job is to adapt to changing circumstances in the market. Right? Any doctor's office, any pharmaceutical company is going to be the expert in the field. Right? No politician, no government agency knows as much about their business. That's legit. And they can regulate themselves, regulate the way they run things to be as efficient as possible. And it all goes back to the profit motive. Without the profit motive, none of these people have any incentive to create quality products and quality services.
Well, as for the wait times in Canada, can you find isolated cases of what you described? Absolutely. But you can find the same
That's
isolated
average wait time.
the average.
That's not isolated.
Well, and so I failed to write down the specifics on this, but in the research I've done, I couldn't find anything to support that.
Okay. The average wait time, well, at least it was 2017. Average wait time was 6 weeks.
Well, I tell you what, conservatives and libertarians like yourself would probably take this approach. But believe it or not, sometimes the answer is no.
I mean,
Sometimes the answer is to hire more doctors to expand the staff. And you would probably agree, having been at the DMV once or twice.
yeah, I mean, more money has been thrown at the healthcare system all the time. Since 1983, healthcare expenditures have only gone up. And what that has resulted in is a significant rise in administrators working in the healthcare industry and zero change in the number of doctors.
Well, I will definitely agree that is egregious. We should have more doctors, and we should have more nurses.
That's what happens when you just throw more money at the problem. Like, a lot of times, they just have too much money. There's less money, so they can take a step back and realize what they're doing inefficiently, fix themselves, which is what a freely competing business would do. Freely competing business has no reason to hire a ridiculous amount of administrators. Problem is, when you have so many regulations, you got to have a ton of people checking boxes on paperwork because there's just an inhuman amount of regulation.
Well, you do bring up Canada, but I also do want to talk about the VA for a second. As I did mention before, according to all the studies I've seen, the average wait time at the VA for new patients is actually shorter than the private sector. So when people talk about, how would a government-run healthcare program in the United States look like? The VA is definitely such an example, but the problem of why it takes so darn long to get anything done there or to get any treatment is it's not because it's government-run. It's because, as I mentioned, the Congress has such strict eligibility requirements, and it takes so long to prove, that you truly need the care, or that it truly is severe enough, or that you are poor.
See, that's the problem that arises from government oversight. Is they impose rules that seem to make sense. You have to verify all of these things in order to get treatment. The problem is that it congests the system so much that you get what the VA is today, which you could get shot and be on your way to the hospital, and they're asking you to fill out paperwork because they have to, because of these arbitrary rules that don't need to be there.
Well, I will say that when you talk about government overreach and when you talk about how government oftentimes makes problems worse, fair point. That is because our politicians are bought and paid for by big pharma. So, as I mentioned earlier, so all of these issues that we're going to talk about tonight, and pretty much any issue in the political field, can connect back to campaign finance. So I do think that should be an urgent top priority for the leaders of this country to make sure that our politicians are not bought and paid for by Wall Street, big pharma, defense contractors, whatever the case may be. So an incompetent government with incompetent or corrupt politicians will yield the kind of situation that you are describing with these regulations that make no sense. But when we look at competent governments in Europe, how is it that they figure this out? How is it that we are the only major developed country that hasn't figured this out? Healthcare, it's not rocket science. And I do believe I've made pretty much any point that I didn't want to talk about
education. I'll let you start on education.
Well, I mean, there are two aspects to this education discussion. There is, public colleges and universities, and then there's grade school. So first I want to talk about colleges and universities. So people always talk about, how do we make college tuition free? How can we pay for that? Well, I would say the same thing that I say on a whole host of issues. Cut the military budget and cut corporate welfare. And people act as if there's no precedent for this, as if we've never done this before. Actually, this has been precedent for a long time. And then Republican politicians became politically motivated to undo tuition-free school because they sold the talking point of, we're going to lower taxes. And who doesn't want more money in their pocket? Who doesn't want to see their check go up? That describes pretty much everyone. I mean, who doesn't want more money? So over the past couple of centuries, the Republicans basically said, okay, we're going to lower your taxes. And people think, you know what? I would like that message, so I'm going to vote for that. Well, how do you make up for that? You establish tuition. So after the Civil War, federal land-grant universities were actually tuition-free for decades and were low-cost until as recently as the 80s. The City University of New York was tuition-free until 1976. Stanford was, as a matter of fact, free for all California residents for 30 years after it was opened in 1891. And Ronald Reagan, who is a conservative hero, he ended free tuition at the University of California. And he cut higher education funding by 20% when he was governor of California. So this is definitely politically motivated to lower taxes, and also, I will say, primarily for the top 1%, for rich folk, for Wall Street. Because typically when Republican conservative politicians, when they talk about, I want to slash your taxes, they're not really talking about everyday ordinary Americans. They are talking about Wall Street. And then how do you make up for that? You establish tuition. So does this apply to every single school and every single college or university? Absolutely not. I mean, you can absolutely find examples of schools that had tuition the entire time that they were established. But as I just mentioned, there are examples, and there are many more, of colleges and universities that were tuition free, and then politicians became politically motivated, and they said, okay, we're going to establish tuition. It's actually a relatively new thing. So from 1980 to 2014, tuition skyrocketed. 260%. 260% in a little over 3 decades. And also, Germany abolished tuition for all European Union students in 2014. I know that I like to talk about Europe a lot, but as social democratic countries, they have a lot of these issues, healthcare, education, you name it, they have it figured out. I'm not saying we should be exactly like them, but we should take some inspiration from them as rich, developed Western countries. So Ireland, France, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, they all charge no tuition for European Union students, and provide low-interest loans for everyone who's not in the European Union. And in Australia and Great Britain, their tuition is only half of ours. And in Israel, it's only a tenth. So there is, in fact, precedent in our own history of having tuition-free schools. And as for other countries, when we look at the European Union, many of them, hell, even the majority of them, are tuition-free. As for other countries, maybe they do have some tuition, but it's only a fraction of ours. So how do we pay for it? Come on, just look at our budget. We have the money for it. And has it ever been done before? Yes, it has been done before in this country. We can do it again.
Well, the reason tuition has gone up so much is because the government government-backed student loans. Colleges essentially have become a massive racketeering scheme that convinces young people that in order to be successful, you must go to college, get a degree, otherwise you have no chance in life. And public schools have been designed to push students into going to college, even if they don't want to, and even if they can't afford it. Because if they can't afford it, they can get a loan from the government. They then have to pay back for the rest of their life. The average college student takes 6 years to get a bachelor's degree. At a very minimum, comes out with $50,000 in debt. Usually $100,000, even $200,000 in debt. The college is useful if you want to do a degree in something that you could only learn at the university setting. Problem is, other alternatives like trade schools are not incentivized by the government. It's only college tuition, and because of this, a college degree has become basically what a high school diploma was 100 years ago. 100 years ago, not everybody had a high school diploma, and so to have a high school diploma was more valuable. If you were applying for a job and you have a high school diploma, somebody else doesn't, you're in the job. Eventually, everyone had a high school diploma, so it wasn't worth as much. So now we start going to college. Anyone with a degree, which is substantially less people than without a degree, you have elevated yourself above anyone else in the job market, which follows supply and demand. So, but the problem is we're reaching the point where the college degree really is not worth anywhere close to what it used to be, and I don't think the government should be promoting colleges as much as they do. I think instead we should be going in the opposite direction. We should be promoting trade schools, learning something that people actually want to do. The problem is people are just pushed in to college at 18. They have no idea what they want to do. Not a clue. What they could be doing is spending those few years working and figuring themselves out. But instead what they do is they go to college and they pursue a passion that they're probably not even passionate about, and then get out of school and there is no job because their degree isn't worth as much as they were told.
Well, you do actually mention a lot of points that I do agree with. And also you talk from experience, having attended college for some time. And also my girlfriend tells me all the time about how she's concerned with how she's going to, pay for her tuition. It is a very serious problem. As for student loans, I know that conservatives do disagree with this vehemently. And heck, there are even a lot of people who are marginally on the left or in the Democratic Party who do disagree with this. But we have the money, we have the funds, we have the means, so we should just straight up forgive student loan debts. And, since I'm arguing that colleges and universities should be tuition free for all future generations, it would only make sense to forgive past generations for the loans they've taken out to pay for their own tuition. And also, when you talk about how continuing your education post high school is not necessary to be successful, amen. I second that. I absolutely agree. And that is why I think we should also reform how our grade school system works. I know I like to talk about Germany a lot since I'm from there, but they really have this figured out. They really do. So after elementary school, it's called Grundschule over there, but they have not one, they have not two, they have 3 different types of secondary schools. I know we only have one here, high school, but over there, 3. So there's Gymnasium, which basically means, all right, so if your test scores are high, if you're showing that you're academically gifted, and then you will go to gymnasium, which is a secondary school, so like high school, and it's geared towards those who do want to continue their studies, who do want to go to university. Then there's Realschule, which basically means, all right, so you're not necessarily academically gifted, you're not necessarily at the bottom of the pile either. So, so if you want to continue your education and study, by all means, but the focus of this secondary school is technical and vocational. Then there's Hauptschule as well, which in layman's terms for dumb kids. But basically it's for those who maybe aren't performing as well, who maybe aren't as gifted. But that's not to say that they are not critical to our workforce. Well, I should say to their workforce over there in Germany. But the focus of Hauptschule is to put people to work. So I do think that we shouldn't necessarily copy this beat by beat, but we can take some inspiration for it. Have different types of secondary schools after middle school. Well, so elementary or middle. Because I think over there it would actually combine middle and high in terms of grades. But I do think we can take some inspiration from this. And since I argue that universities and colleges should be tuition free, heck, the exact same for technical and trade schools. Mm-hmm. I do think we should incentivize, though, putting people to work, not just with their mind, but also with their hands. And as I will talk about later in the infrastructure section, oh my goodness, our country is crumbling. Imagine the millions of jobs we could create, putting people to work, repairing our bridges or our highways, our irrigation systems, et cetera, you name it. So absolutely, I do think there's some agreement here in terms of putting people to work.
When it comes to public schooling, K through 12 is an old system. I think it should be K through 10. Once you reach 10th grade, take a test. Pass the test, you get a diploma. And then you can spend those next 2 years that you would otherwise be doing nothing in high school for your last 2 years. Instead, you could be working. You could work your ass off as much as you would have when you were in high school, but instead of taking useless classes, which you don't want to take, you take something that you're actually interested in. You actually learn a skill or a trade. And I think that's what should be promoted in public schools. Now, the problem with public schools, their funding has increased significantly in the last few decades. And as with healthcare, that has resulted in more administrators being hired. There are schools all over the country with more administrators than teachers. And that is only because of bureaucracy and because of extra money. If money reflected the success of the students, if the success of students today is measured in test scores haven't changed. Money's skyrocketed. Test scores have remained flat. So obviously money is not the issue. For we're the richest country in the world. We have lots of money. But money isn't the problem. If money were the problem, we'd already fix this issue. The problem is schools, school districts, and teachers don't have the freedom to set their own curriculum, to teach the way they want to teach, innovate things that they feel need to be innovated in. Everything is regulated by the Department of Education, which is unconstitutional, of course. Department of Education should not exist, should never have existed. Department of Education just gives the federal government the ability to say every student has to know these things, otherwise they're not going to be successful in the world. The problem is the government creating these standards. These standards don't apply the same way. Different schools need to need to adjust the way they do things to suit their population, to suit themselves, the way they want to do things. And schools and teachers need to have the freedom to innovate. Otherwise, quality of education.
Well, I will echo a lot of what you just said. That the last thing we need is more superintendents and clerks and secretaries. What we need is more teachers, and what we need to do, once and for all, unequivocally, is give teachers a raise. So from 2015 to 2016, the teacher layover was a 16%, and 8% quit teaching entirely, and 18% actually worked a second job. At the fine men and women charged with educating our kids should not be taking a second job, or should not feel compelled to leave because their salary isn't high enough, or because they don't feel valued, or because they don't feel like their work matters, because their work does matter. And also, I do oppose Common Core. I do oppose having these federal standards. I do believe that government has a role in education, healthcare, whatever the case may be. But this is a case of overreach. You can't take 2 people, 3 people, and say, okay, they should all be measured by the same standard, because they don't have the same goals in life. They don't have the same outlook on life. They're just not the same people. So why would you hold them to the same standard? And also, I think it's very important that in grade school, we should not focus so much on things like calculus, because, I mean, when you go to the grocery store or something, do you use calculus? Or when you're working a job at a cash register, like you and I mean, like, maybe we'll use some algebra every once in a while, but that's about it, and only basic algebra at that. I mean, when do we ever use calculus? Never. I mean, hell, I didn't even take it, so I have no idea how it works, and I'm doing just fine. I think grade school should have a mandatory culinary class, because how many teenagers, young men and women, don't know how to cook and live off of ramen? Way too many, an embarrassing amount. How many people don't know how to wash dishes, fold clothes? How many people are financially illiterate, don't know how to save up money? How many people don't know the basics of how to vote? The list goes on. So I think in terms of grade school, you and I do have some room for agreement here that we should focus on some basic life skills that so many young men and women these days are simply lacking. So you and I do agree, raise teacher salaries, have less bureaucrats, and also not hold everyone to the same standard. And that is why I'm a proponent of having multiple types of secondary schools, each geared towards a different career path, each geared towards a different academic level. That's not to say that those who are going to university are that much smarter than those who want to work with their hands. So I'm not saying that one is better than the other. It's just a different path, everyone living their different truth. And I, for one, am not going to college either. I don't think it's necessary for success. But for those who do want to pursue that path, it should be an option for them.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with you on public school. The education system is designed to create tax-paying factory workers, which is a system that is long overdue to be renovated. I think where we definitely disagree is free college.
Well, there is precedent for it. We've done it before. We can do it again.
Yeah, but
as was the case in Stanford, as was the case with the University of California, as was the case with the City University of New York. It's been done before, can be done again. And as I mentioned earlier, it was politically motivated because we were going to lower taxes, but not for you ordinary people, for our Wall Street buddies. How do we make up for that? Establish tuition or raise tuition. So when I want to make a school's tuition free, I know we like to act like we're entirely objective, but you know what? My position is politically motivated too. It's politically motivated out of my moral standing that everyone should have their dreams empowered, whether that be trade school, whether that be entering the workforce, whether that be pursuing your education and getting a degree, whatever the case may be, you should be empowered. And your government should let you know and prove to you that it cares about your well-being. Because in the preamble of the Constitution, it does talk about the general welfare and domestic tranquility. I know you and I may disagree on how to interpret those words, but my interpretation is very strong. The general welfare, I think, empower people, and we can empower people.
See, I don't think the issue is whether we can. We absolutely can. The government can print as much money as it wants to pay for whatever it wants. It's the way the Federal Reserve System works. The issue is whether we should, right? Whether we want a program to be enforced at the end of the gun, to be paid for by the American public, right? Tuition used to be affordable. You used to be able to work a part-time job and pay your way through college. 50, 60 years ago, that's what people did. Problem is, government's like, hey, we can make this more affordable and guarantee loans. So colleges are like, awesome. Government's guaranteeing money to anyone who wants to come to us. Let's raise our prices. Government will pay it. And now we're where we are today. These costs have gone up so much, and we have an entire generation, several generations that are in crippling debt, which I do agree with you should be canceled. Student loan debt. Anyone with student loan debt, in my opinion, is a victim of fraud by government and by the public school system. And by universities. Universities are just as guilty in all of this as the government is. Like with healthcare, they should be put into the free market. They should have to compete. Problem is, like, colleges are no longer competing for the quality of their education. Any advertisement you see given to students for colleges is advertising the amenities that they provide. It's advertising the gym. It's advertising their food court. You don't see advertisements for the quality of their education. It's because that's not what is motivating people to go to college anymore. Students are being pushed into going to college. They're like, well, I'll go there because they don't care, because it's the quality of it, the value of a college degree has gone down so much. If these schools were actually in competition with each other, you would have less people going to college to waste their time, to appease their parents, and more people going to college because they actually want to be there. And then in that case, prices are lower because they're competing with each other. If you're trying to convince a student to go to your school as opposed to your competitor who's just as good on the quality of your education as the other, you lower your prices. You want to incentivize people to go to the school. So it's the way the free market works. It's the way the free market should be the way we do everything.
Well, people like yourself who are a proponent of the free market, they always talk about the so-called invisible hand. The invisible hand, it's not nudging at the market in the right direction, in the direction of lower prices. It's not, and it's also not nudging people in the direction of success. It is at the throats of ordinary Americans. And I simply, from a moral perspective, don't believe that is the right answer here, and I also don't believe it will guarantee people the livelihood to which they are entitled. And I would connect that back to the general welfare. If government has the means to provide for the general welfare, it absolutely must. I mean, we have hundreds of unnecessary military bases overseas. We have all these fighter jets and aircraft carriers that we really don't need. So
I don't disagree that we can pay for it,
and we should.
Absolutely can.
Every other major developed nation has this figured out.
Yeah, but
it's not rocket science.
Look at Germany though. You have students going to school for 10 years, getting a degree in underwater basket weaving because it's free. You can spend as much time in college as you want, and government just shells out that money. That the government of Germany, the budget is suffering because of that. They're having budget problems because the amount that they're spending on tuition-free college is just going up. Especially as Americans find out they can go there, go to school really cheap. They do it too. Like foreigners are entering Germany and taking advantage of their system.
I will actually say that is a fair point because oftentimes when I'm over there, my grandpa will rant about how this generation is taking advantage of a tuition-free school and they're going to school for an absolute eternity, and then the degree ends up being worthless. Mm-hmm. And he also oftentimes talks about how Germany's workforce is suffering and how it doesn't have people pursuing those, technical jobs, those vocational. So that's absolutely fair, but I do believe that a limit could possibly be placed on how long you can pursue education until you're just basically leeching off the system. I mean, if you're spending 10 years on underwater basket weaving, is that really a thing? That sounds like you made it up. But if it really is a thing, I mean, that's just ludicrous. I mean, we both can agree that just should not be allowed.
Yeah, and that's the problem we get when the government guarantees things like this. People take advantage of it. Government gives people free phones too, and people take advantage of that. Take advantage of anything the government anything will be provided to them for free.
Well, actually, tell you what, I do believe also there could be, no, just not could be, but should be some reform as to the curriculum at these colleges and universities and how many courses they have you take. I mean, because my girlfriend all the time, she talks about, she's pursuing a bachelor's in music, but she's taking all of these unnecessary classes, like zoology, for instance. Do you really need zoology for a degree in music? No. So I do believe some reform could be made there as well, and then people also wouldn't be spending years pursuing a degree that really should not take them that long. So I do think that we can cut some corners and make sure that people go through their education more smoothly, more quickly, more efficiently. So your point is not entirely moot. There is merit to it, absolutely. Well, I'm curious. In your college experience, if it had been tuition free, would you have continued?
No. I felt as though it was a waste of time.
Or if you felt that the courses you were taking weren't, just completely useless, and they actually truly connected to your passion, would you have continued then?
I might have.
Because you probably were taking a number of classes that just were entirely unrelated, irrelevant. You really didn't get it. Well, no, I probably shouldn't curse in this debate. I was going to say this.
Only one or two classes I took were actually relevant, so I was interested.
See, there you go. Yeah. And that illustrates my point. So of course you're doing just fine, not having to continue your education. But if you had wanted to, I believe that government should have empowered you, and I do believe that we should take a look at these degree programs and the curriculum and just cut out unnecessary courses. I mean, I'm trying to think of an example. Say you are pursuing a degree in history, all right? Then why should you have to take a class in welding or something?
Yeah. Well,
Two entirely unrelated things. Or if you are pursuing a degree in mathematics, why should you have to take a class on marine biology?
no, I agree. I think a lot of these classes are unnecessary for the degree, but I also don't think the government needs to be regulating that.
Well, I mean, since a lot of these schools are public, and well, since they are public, the government does have oversight and does have jurisdiction. If they were private, that would be entirely different. Private entities can do whatever the heck they want, but public schools, since they are publicly funded,
private colleges shouldn't be publicly funded. For one, they don't need it. They have ridiculous amounts of money already. They absolutely don't need government funding. Government funding is a negligible amount of the money that the colleges bring in. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the money they bring in isn't even from tuition. It's from all the other fees that the students have to pay. Right? This what colleges are doing to students is criminal. They're exploiting students, and they're exploiting the government's ubiquitous loans. And the problem with making college free is not that we don't have the money. We do have the money. Problem is where that money comes from. We shouldn't be overtaxing the population because we are. Taxation is theft. Taxation is enforced at the point of the gun. Every new law, every new regulation ultimately is enforced at gunpoint. That's what has to be realized for any situation like this. Sure, free college is, it's a noble cause. But what you're doing is you're pointing a gun in the head of other people. So your money's going to pay for it. And that's not the way it should be. It should be a free market system.
Well, the tax burden when it comes to my education proposal, the tax burden when it comes to my healthcare proposal, whatever the case may be, is not really so much on ordinary people. It's on those who need to pay their fair share and those who are sitting on billions and billions and billions of dollars. And how did they make that money? Off of the backs of the very people that these programs would help them most.
That's not true. They made their money by investing what they had to build businesses that employ thousands of people. And because they put all that time and effort and resources into starting that business, not only did they employ thousands of people, they made billions for themselves, which they can then go and reinvest into the economy, create even more jobs. Right? When you have, how do you define fair share? What is my fair share versus fair share of Jeff Bezos? Jeff Bezos has worked extraordinarily hard for his money. Harder than I work on any given day.
I will actually use this as a segue into the next section, because Jeff Bezos and Amazon, they are putting so many small businesses out of business, out of commission. So, and I know that there's overlap here. I know there's some agreement, and we both are in favor of universal basic income. and that connects to the broader topic of social programs. So since Amazon and these giant corporations are putting Main Street out of business, what we should do is guarantee people a basic income, because you can't be faulted for automation. You can't be faulted for the changing tide of this technological age. So people should have that guarantee that, you know what, I still have to work, I still have to make ends meet, but there is that base, there is that foundation. I won't be completely left in the dark. And also, we need to redefine what counts as work in this country. I mean, if you are, say you work the traditional 9 to 5, and you are a family man, you provide for the family, you know what, kudos to you, that's amazing. I do want to empower that, but also the stay-at-home mom. I mean, that's work, technically. She may not be crunching numbers or putting on a uniform, but that work matters. Childcare matters. And then if we give the stay-at-home mom a UBI of $1,000 a month, and then guess where that goes? That goes to childcare. That goes to car repairs. That goes to the occasional night out. It stimulates the economy, because take a town of just 1,000 people. That's a very small town. 1,000 times 1,000? Well, so 1,000 adults, I mean, since UBI would be for everyone 18 and up. So a town of 1,000 adults, that's already $1 million in a month already. And then a year, that would be $12 million. So imagine how that would stimulate the economy. Oh boy. Oh boy. And I do believe that there is a consensus among a lot of libertarians as well, because since you believe in free choice, you can't choose that the automation is now taking over this economy. It's not your fault. So you should, as a matter of fact, be compensated for that. And how do you pay for it? A 10% value-added tax. And 160 of 193 countries have it. So that's the vast, vast majority of countries have a VAT tax. So we can absolutely do it. And it would generate at least, probably more, but at the very least, $800 billion in revenue. So there you go. That's okay.
Yeah, well, I agree with universal basic income. I think it should replace every other social program that we have. I think all the other social programs are either designed to keep people dependent on those social programs, or they are going to run out of money very soon. Social Security, for example. I will never receive Social Security no matter how much I pay into it. It will not exist by the time I hit retirement age. Right? All of these programs, they're too costly and they don't work. They have the opposite effects of the universal basic income. Is actually an Austrian economic idea. I believe it was Murray Rothbard. I could be mistaken. So it seems like an unlibertarian idea. I think obviously I'm opposed to the income tax, but some taxes are necessary. I've always said this, so it can be paid for. I think the fewer programs the government has to pay for, the better. And if you could consolidate an entire system of broken systems, consolidate it down into one, I believe that's ideal. It's more efficient.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, Social Security is a staple of the American life. But unfortunately, it is a failing system. And I can't deny the writing on the wall. But who do I blame for that? I blame career politicians for raiding the trust fund to pay for their wars. But that's not to say that it wouldn't have gone insolvent at some point anyway. It probably would have. But that absolutely drove up the timeline. I do believe, at the very least, that those already receiving benefits should continue to. And those who have already paid into the system, I think you are owed that money. The government literally owes you that money back. So you should, so you should at the very least get that back. As for those who haven't yet paid into it, I think that is where UBI should step in. And as for those who have already received the benefits, so I do believe that UBI should be a supplement to that, not necessarily a replacement, but a supplement. So I believe that UBI should be $1,000 a month. Say that your Social Security check, so the average is about $1,400, $1,500. So say that your Social Security check is $900. Then I think UBI should make up the difference of that $100. If your Social Security check exceeds that, then maybe you should sit out the UBI. But I think it should be a supplement, not necessarily full-on replacement. But for those who have not yet paid into it or are not already receiving the benefits, that's where UBI should step in.
Yeah.
I do believe that Social Security was the right step for President Roosevelt at the time. It was the right move. It was the right call. But it only worked out for a certain amount of time.
I think it worked. I mean, it's the problem with Keynesian economics is it works in the short term, but in the long term, it sacrifices the stability of the economy to create that short-term growth. What you get is the occasional recession every decade or so afterwards, because you're just building on top of the new bubble every time. I think Social Security, the way it was done, was definitely the wrong way to do it. The way it was done, it's a Ponzi scheme. Essentially, you're relying on new payers to pay for the old payers. But it reaches the point where we are now, way more baby boomers that are the other generation, except millennials. Millennials will be the next, even bigger generation. Fortunately, Social Security won't be around by then. The problem is, you mentioned the Social Security fund. Social Security doesn't really have a fund. When all of that is paid into the IRS, they don't differentiate Social Security tax versus the income tax. It's all pulled together. And once it reaches the Treasury, it's all just the same money, and it's divided up later based on what needs to be paid. Of course, we always pay more than we have anyway. The problem isn't tax revenue. The government doesn't care about the tax revenue. They can just correct money.
Well, so be that as it may, and that surely may be the case, it is very true, and we can both agree that the war hawks and neoliberals, they stole from American workers. They stole their hard-earned money. And I do believe that making sure those already drawing those checks, that they continue to until the day they die, and that those who are not receiving those benefits already, that they receive UBI. I think that is step number one, paying back the American people, because the government does owe them a massive debt. And I think that's the first step.
The government didn't take from Social Security. They're going to pay the same amount in Social Security, or a proportional amount for Social Security payments as the expenses accumulate. Expense is going to be different each year. Like government going into more wars, that's what they're going to do. Social Security has nothing to do with it. It's not gonna, you can't take money from Social Security because it's all pulled together.
Well, I think so.
You pretty much agree that UBI.
Yeah, I mean, I knew that would happen. So the final section, infrastructure, where I by far have the most notes.
Privatize everything.
And why is that?
Well, not everything. I would propose a system where infrastructure is maintained by private companies in exchange for exclusive use of any roads. Say you have, I-35, and Amazon would like to use I-35. Well, let's say you build another highway perfectly parallel to I-35. One of them is a public highway, the other is a private highway. Amazon can use that private highway for whatever they want to use, exclusively for them. They could let anybody drive on it, or they could just be for their trucks. In exchange, they have to maintain both highways. Right? They have to, and they have to be held to strict standards on keeping them maintained. The government today has zero incentive to keep roads maintained. And driving on roads, you can surely understand how dilapidated roads can get when they're not maintained, because the government has no competition. If you don't like the roads, tough shit. What else are you gonna do about that? The government has a monopoly on it, right? You add competition to the mix. Even if some of that competition is the government, then they're not the only player out there.
Well, you and I definitely do agree that our infrastructure is crumbling. I mean, the American Society of Civil Engineers, it needs that at least $4.6 trillion is needed over the next decade to repair it, maintain it, and upgrade it. And as a matter of fact, the society, it gives our infrastructure a B+ grade, which indicates, quote, significant deterioration and strong risk of failure. So we absolutely agree that there is a problem, just not as to the solution. Imagine the millions of jobs that we could create by ensuring that there is state-of-the-art public transit, that our interstate is tip-top, that our roads are tip-top, and also, since we are talking about infrastructure broadly, I mean, our bridges, our airports, our tunnels, our railways, our broadband, internet, et cetera, I mean, the list goes on. Our infrastructure is abysmal in this country. It's like we're a third world country, almost. I'll go ahead and say something if you want. I will stop.
I think currently spends a little less than $500 billion as a country every year on infrastructure, which is a lot of money considering not a lot gets done. Now, the majority of that comes from states, like 3/4 of that comes from state and local government. The rest of it comes from the federal government.
25% of funding is federal. Yeah. It was 38% in 77.
Yeah. Yeah, that divide it's changed a little bit over the years.
Well, and also, since both you and I have traveled a whole bunch, particularly around Europe, you can definitely agree that our public transit is abysmal compared to other developed nations.
Yeah.
And And in most developed countries, the overwhelming majority of their funding for their infrastructure is federal, is national. Here, unfortunately, because of the darn 10th Amendment, it is significantly less. So I do believe that there is jurisdiction for the federal government to step in and say, okay, you know what, we are going to fund state-of-the-art public transit. I mean, what we need is more buses. What we need is more subways. What we need is a more expansive railway system. And
I would rather see states do that than the federal government. I think states can much more effectively do it.
well, to have a more comprehensive, cohesive system, I do believe it's best to have that be national, because if it were state by state, then a railway might just suddenly end in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, but
Or
that's assuming that the states just aren't.
or a bus route might just randomly.
Yeah, but states aren't just going to not communicate with each other.
Well, I mean,
States already maintain state highways that interconnect with each other.
so that example may be a bit overstated. It probably is a bit hyperbolic, but I do believe for the sake of cohesion, for the sake of having this process be more smooth, I do believe it's best to have it be entirely national. Because, I mean, yes, the states will coordinate, the states will communicate, but I think they'll only stand in the way of having a comprehensive plan from the very beginning. And we can get it done. So I really think we should take a playbook out of every other major developed country. And actually, I will make at the same point on everything else that we've talked about tonight. Healthcare and education. I mean, golly, why are we behind in so much? I mean, we always talk about how we're the greatest country in the world. Well, I mean, sure, we're number one in a lot of things, but not really in the categories where it matters. And we really need to stop boasting about how great we are, because our infrastructure is that of a third world country, and I've been to some third world countries.
Yeah.
So I really think that the federal government should step in and say, you know what, this is intolerable. Let's put the American people back to work. And I think this also connects back to our earlier discussion about education. And this is a ripe opportunity right here to put people to work. This is a ripe opportunity for those who don't want to continue their education, go to college, for those who have a more vocational for those who have a more vocational interest. I think we can put those people to work maintaining our roads or expanding them. Same with our bridges, same with everything else in our infrastructure. So the Highway Trust Fund, it raises its money through the gas tax, which hasn't been increased in over 2 decades. So I do think that taking a second look at this tax, making sure it is in tune with the times of today, I do think we can raise the funds to make sure that we get the investment we need. And also the HTF, the Highway Trust Fund, it is on track for insolvency. It's supposed to have a deficit of $6 billion by 2022. So I think that we have the means to upgrade our infrastructure into the 21st century and to put people to work. And I do think there is jurisdiction for the federal government to get it done. And so, of course, there are a number of proposals as to, well, how do we fund this? How do we coordinate this? There's one such proposal that I do agree with, and that is to have a national infrastructure bank, which would be a government-owned corporation. And there is, in fact, precedent for this. There are examples, such as the European Investment Bank. It is focused on raising the funds and coordinating the financing of national infrastructure, and that would include roads, bridges, highways, tunnels, railways, airports, et cetera, you name it. So if we have the means, why not do it?
Well, the government's had the means to do all this for a long time.
They just didn't care enough.
Exactly. The government doesn't they don't have the motivation to do it. If you've ever driven on a toll road, which is a private road owned by a private company, you have to pay some amount of money to drive on. They're better quality roads. They're maintained. You never hit traffic on them. They're simply better roads, and it's because they're beholden to the free market. Now, a lot of examples of toll roads are government contracts, and that's a different story. The fact is that the government just does a terrible job maintaining our infrastructure. Like they did a great job in the beginning. Highway system is very few things have contributed to our economic growth as the interstate highway system did. But the problem is we've been a rich and powerful country for so long, and we don't feel like we need to put in the same amount of effort we used to put in. And you look at our roads and you can understand the results of that. Now, the free market has a pretty quality turnover rate. The more companies jump in competition, the more are going to be created, the more are going to go out of business, and the more things will change to improve things for the average person. And you can create just as many jobs privatizing all of this as you can government programs. Like you can create thousands of jobs by having the government spend money on it. But you could also let the free market do its job. Like we could get to total employment if we wanted to. If we actually opened up the markets. But the invisible hand do its work.
Well, I do think that there is merit to your approach, as there is with mine, and both approaches may very well be effective. I think it's just a matter of what is the urgency of this problem, and what is the urgency of our solution. How could yours work? Absolutely. But having individual companies leaving this in the hands of individual companies, I think would take a long time. What we need is a bold, coordinated national strategy. And I do believe that my plan offers that. So in the same way that the country was mobilized after the Great Depression, in the same way that the country was mobilized after Pearl Harbor, the country should come together and realize, you know what? I mean, this is a crisis. And not just infrastructure, but all the other issues that we've talked about tonight, and so many other issues that we haven't been able to touch on. I mean, we are facing so many crises in this country, and if we mobilize nationally, we can get it done in a few months or maybe a year. Whereas leaving it up to the free market, leaving it up to the profit motive, I simply don't trust that. Because how did we get into so many of the problems that we find ourselves in today? By trusting the wealthy, by trusting business people, and having the benefit of the doubt that they have the best interests of the American people at heart. They really don't. All they care about is their own pocket.
Yeah, well, I think you can look at historical examples. The government can do a good job at something at the very beginning. But given enough time, it will let things slip. And basically any example you want to look at. Government does a good job when it starts doing it, and after a while, the quality just goes down the tubes. Whereas in a free market, competition is always there. If you can't compete, you go out of business. business. The government can't go out of business. That's what makes the free market a much more appealing option. Is that, well, if you're not satisfying your customers, you lose your business. Government just doesn't work that way. Government will still continue to function just fine. There are potholes every 3 feet, roads. Whereas, if I want to go drive on a private road, there's potholes every few feet. Nobody's going to drive on that road. It's not going to make money. They'll go to the competition.
Well, in the same way that you can find examples of competent businessmen or competent businesswomen looking after the best interests of their employees, you can find the exact opposite examples of business people who just screw over their employees. And by the same token, you can find the same example for the government. You can find examples of the government looking after the best interests of its people and also not looking after the best interests of its people. So it's all just a matter of what do we believe, what idea do we mobilize around, and also which party do we elect. That's not to say the Democratic Party is by any means perfect, but if we elect from the top of the ballot to the bottom of the ballot progressives who are not bought by Wall Street, but who rather serve Main Street, then I don't think we're going to see the problems that you're describing in terms of competence.
Yeah, see, when companies do things like that, they face consequences. Government doesn't face consequences, and with the exception of politicians maybe not being reelected. But that's not even usually the case. Congress has a 90% reelection rate, considering what an awful job they do. Right? The government does not face the consequences for incompetency in their products or services or screwing over customers. Whereas corporations do have to pay consequences, whether those are criminal consequences or market consequences. They have to face consequences.
Well, I absolutely do agree that so many of our politicians who are basically crooks and are corrupted should face the consequences, and that, actually this is a topic that we're not covering tonight, but just very briefly, I do think we should look at election reform. Having ranked choice voting and getting rid of first past the post, abolishing the electoral college, we probably agree with that. And also publicly financing our elections, because if politicians screw up, they should be fired by their constituency. And I do believe, I would give the American people the benefit of the doubt. They can identify a crook when they see them. But unfortunately, in the system of lesser evils, they feel forced to pick one.
Yeah, I'm absolutely in favor of ranked choice voting. What I would love to see is you try out ranked choice voting and see how well third parties do. Because that'll tell you how many people actually would like to see third party candidates. People don't vote third party because they feel like between the Republican and the Democrat, one of them is a lesser evil, and if they vote third party, they're not voting against the greater evil. But with ranked choice voting, you can put your preferred candidate ahead of the others, but you can still fall back on whoever you believe is the lesser evil. I mean, I think the lesser evil argument is ridiculous. I would rather see everybody vote purely their conscience and not strategically. If everybody stopped voting strategically, voted for what they believed in, we'd probably see more third party. We pretty much do that.
Yeah. Well, that's just to illustrate my point that politicians are incompetent, then they should absolutely face the consequences in the same way that incompetent business people should face the consequences.
Politicians should be held to the highest possible standards. Like, we shouldn't take anything. Like, the smallest screw up, they should be screwed up. Right? You should have to really, really want to do good to be a politician. Politicians should be an awful job. Right? Unfortunately, it's a job where you get rich and powerful.
Well, if I fail on even a single one of my promises, then just kick me right out after.
That's the one thing.
Yeah, I think that was it.
Right. In this awkward meeting.